Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for very timely leadership. I think this is a particularly important time for us to look back. And Dr. Warner, it's so great to have the Medicare Rights Center. I can remember days when all of us had Diane Archer on speed dial for the wonderful work that she'd been doing for the rights of seniors, and welcome to all of you. Recalling just for a minute the ferocious debate that took place when this legislation was first considered, I think you have to start with the proposition that at that time the level of desperation among seniors for some measure of assistance with their medicine was just extraordinary. And at the time, it really felt like this debate had gone on for eons. I mean, I can remember this back in the days when we were just getting the Gray Panthers off the ground in Oregon. We were talking about this very issue. And I came to the conclusion at the time that we were really at a fork in the road, and that if we didn't take the opportunity to at least get started, it would probably be eons more before we ever got this effort underway. And I told Senator Warren, I remember talking with Senator Kennedy, who of course had worked for this for years. So I voted for the legislation. The welts on my back for doing so took a couple of years to heal. But the reality is, at least we've gotten started, and we've been able to help a lot of people. And Dr. Warner, your points with respect to the future are really spot on. And I just want to ask a couple of questions, here by way of what's ahead. Now, one of the major concerns today is how seniors are going to afford these specialty drugs, what are called, in effect, I guess the technical name is the specialty tier drugs. These were drugs that largely weren't even on the boards back when this program got started. Cancer drugs, arthritis drugs, MS drugs. I've been very concerned, for example, about Xeljanz. This is a drug where the government played a very large role in its development. Pfizer, now the company with the drug, looking like $25,000. That's a big lift for the seniors that Senator Nelson does such a good job advocating for. What would be your counsel with respect to how to deal with these specialty drugs that are so expensive, and I think increasingly they're going to be injectables, and they're going to play a bigger and bigger role in the healthcare landscape. So your thoughts on holding down the cost of these specialty drugs for seniors would be how I'd start.
There's a particular problem with specialty drugs for people who are really in lower incomes. What happens is, for other medications, if the doctor prescribes a particular medication that's in a high tier, not a specialty tier, the client can appeal to lower the tier, lower the price, if there is not another drug that that person can use instead. Specialty drugs do not have that. One cannot appeal for a lower price for a specialty drug. And we've had many callers who have needed one of the specialty drugs for conditions like multiple sclerosis, for example, who can't appeal to the company because they are low income. One woman I recall was living on about $1,700 Social Security income. She was above the level for the extra help, low income subsidy, but that's not a lot of income. So she really had to choose between her multiple sclerosis drug at the very high cost and food or other everyday living expenses. So I think the first thing would be to allow a process of the same kind of appeal that you have for tier appeals, lowering tier costs, apply to the specialty drugs.
That sounds too logical for Washington. Let us work with all of you. I want to see if I can get one other response. And I thought Senator Warren asked a very good question about chronic disease and medicine. I'd like to get that in if I can. So why don't we have one more response?
Sure. On the chronic disease issue and ways to move forward, Senator?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, perhaps picking up where I left off, one of the issues with medication therapy management today, as it's set up in Part D, is who is targeted for medication therapy management. Right now, you have to have high drug expenditures, and in practice, you have to be taking a lot of different medicines. So part of the issue there is that we may be missing people who are non-adherent because they're not taking their medicines and they don't have, the level of drug expenditure that triggers MTMP. Maybe we ought to be looking at what's their total expenditure and what kind of conditions do they have, and can MTMP be helping rather than just zeroing in the way we did. I think we have a lot of opportunity to make progress on cost and on quality by going these routes.
My time has expired. I hope that all of you as companies and advocates will also start to factor in that these drugs affect people differently. And for years and years, medicine has always been based on the proposition that this drug will affect Harry and George in the same way, and Sally and Betty in the same way. And I think this is particularly important in the area of chronic disease, where Senator Warren has made the important point that we ought to be focused more on patient management and relate to individuals. And to do that right, we're going to need to know more about the differential treatment of medicines for different people, what has really sort of begun, at least with personalized medicine, but where there's going to have to be a lot more work. Senator Nelson, again, big thanks to you for all the leadership.